A warm welcome to this series regarding health and performance, powered by Check-up Center Hirslanden and Hintsa Performance. In this series, we aim to help you to improve your health and performance with measurable results. Because after all, performance is a byproduct of improved health and well-being. We can't achieve peak performance without a basic good health and well-being. My name is Dr. Erat. I'm a Chief Medical Officer at Check-up Center Hirslanden, and today I have two experts here, Dan Sims and Professor Thomas Szucs. Warm welcome. Lovely that you're here this morning.
Morning.
Dan, what is your connection with resilience, mental health? What's your background?
Yeah, so my background is actually in physical training, physical coaching, and I'm a performance coach with Hintsa Performance. I've worked in motorsport predominantly for the last 4 years or so, and in Formula One. And my connection to kind of resilience is that these individuals are under a lot of stress, potentially kind of life and death situation every time they get in the car, stress and outside stresses as well from the media and from their teams. So they have to be very resilient to not only mental stress but also physical stress within the car.
Clearly. I mean, that's a high stress environment, obviously.
Exactly. Yeah, it is.
And Thomas, what about you? What's your connection here? What's your background?
Medical doctor by training. But over the last decades, I've been engaged very much not only in academia, but also in corporate life. So I'm attached very much to organizations. And in the last 8 or 9 years, I've started also to work in the field of genetics in the Hirslanden clinic.
So of course, you're an expert in genetics. So in terms of resilience, in terms of mental well-being, what do you think? What is the role of genetics and what is the role of actually healthy lifestyle? So nature versus nurture.
Very, very good question. The number that I will give you is 33.3%. I mean, this is sort of the ballpark figure where people say, what is the contribution of genetics to health? And I would guess here that we can take this number as a good orientation to say these are genetic factors. However, DNA is not destiny. That means not necessarily that what I have received from my parents will necessarily be what I will be then later on. But the rest obviously can be influenced very much by external factors like training, environment, food, etc.
So we're actually not slaves of our genes.
Definitely not.
Dan, what is your experience here? You have so much experience also with coaching, so kind of overcoming your genetic predisposition. What is your experience here?
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that percentage because I'd agree some people are kind of predisposed to appear more resilient, but then from my point of view and from my experience, I see it as being very trainable. And it's trainable from lots of different areas in terms of kind of holistic health and well-being. So we know that if you're sleeping well, you're going to be more resilient to stress. If you're exercising as well, you're going to be more resilient to stress. You're going to put your mind in a more kind of positive position to adapt and to kind of deflect that stress. So adapting those things and changing those things definitely makes you more resilient to stress.
I'm going to get back to sleep and nutrition because these are everyday issues that we deal with, so incredibly important. But I would like to know, what do you do in order to combat stress and become more robust mentally? What do you do, Thomas?
I have an activity that really helps me to regenerate or refill the batteries. It's a hobby that not many people have, but it's conducting classical music.
Wow.
Because when you conduct classical music, you cannot think of anything else during that procedure. That's what a lot of sports people tell you as well when they golf, for example. They cannot think of other things. But by conducting a classical orchestra, you really have to focus on what you're doing. And at the same time, it's a part of leadership because you have to lead people and you have to convey your message. But the brain is completely shut off. And what helps there is the wonderful music that stimulates your happy hormones.
Fantastic. We also have a clip on you actually conducting an orchestra. about you, Dan? What do you do?
Well, my passion is endurance sport, but I think it's really interesting listening to Thomas because I think it's about the individual's kind of core and their characteristics in terms of their identity. So understanding what makes them inherently happy and what gives them a lot of kind of satisfaction, what exercise or what form of activity that is. So yeah, I've done in the past a lot of triathlon and cycling, and I find similar to kind of conducting music is that when you're in a race or a training session, you're fully focused on that, then nothing else really matters in kind of the world at that point. So you can really detach.
Yeah.
So that helps me.
Since we're in the Julius Baer studio, we know that Julius Baer also sponsors bobsled running, and I just started 2 years ago with monobob running, and it's brilliant to have really a balance between the clinical everyday life, where we see a lot of patients, where it's quite stressful, and then doing something completely different. So I fully agree with you. But if we get back to sleep and nutrition, because this is something that we have to deal with or can deal with every single day, what is the role of nutrition and sleep, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, both of these factors play a huge role, and I'll pick on sleep first of all, because we know that if you sleep well, your accuracy is improved. You're resilient to stress in terms of dealing with your emotions, as well as is kind of enhanced. So when we sleep, if we sleep sufficiently, we're getting a good portion of REM sleep, and that's the area of sleep that regenerates your brain, helps you deal with stressful situations. Now, if we're not getting that, we get a kind of build-up essentially. And actually, they started to do research into this within Alzheimer's and dementia science. And we know that kind of cognitive disorders can be basically exaggerated from poor sleep and things like that. So sleep is absolutely vitally important not only for health, but also in terms of improving your performance. We measure reaction times of the drivers, and we do that every morning, especially I've done it with the junior drivers, and they've been gaming overnight and staying up late at night, and they can see from the reaction times that if they're getting good quality sleep, then that's improved, and that's going to directly impact their performance in the race car. So that's a huge area.
Well, we see that also in traffic accidents. So a great portion of traffic accidents are really due to sleep deprivation. And I think in one of your books, it was really clearly stated that 20 hours of, so for, what was it, if you for a week only sleep 6 hours a day, what happens?
Yeah, exactly. It's an accumulative effect. Right. So, and the weird thing with that is you actually start to feel, you feel normal. You adapt to that feeling of being tired. However, after, I think it's a couple of weeks, 10 days or a couple of weeks of shortened sleep, around 6 hours, is the equivalent of being awake for basically 24 hours solid. So you're not getting a night's sleep, right. Which is actually quite similar to being legally drunk in some countries. So your reaction times are like you are kind of intoxicated.
Remarkable. It's really remarkable. And you already discussed or pointed out Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and so forth. Of course, the accumulation of amyloid plaques, that's one of the reasons why we develop Alzheimer's disease. And sleep is a time of the day where the brain is transporting and eliminating the toxins that have been accumulating during the day. So we can also measure that. So it's just not only hypothetical, but this is something that we can objectively also measure.
It's incredible. We were working with some scientists from a scheme called Race Against Dementia, which is supported by an ex-Formula One driver, Jackie Stewart, and they analyse the brain tissue of these individuals, and they can, like you just said, they can physically see high levels of things like that amyloid, and yeah, you can actually see that in their tissue. So it's not. We start to know a little bit more about the effects of poor sleep now, long term as well as short term. Yeah.
What about you, Thomas? What's your experience with sleep and nutrition?
Well, if we look at the interplay from a pure pathophysiological point of view, it's quite clear that metabolism runs 24 hours. And if you, for example, before going to sleep, you have, let's say, a lot of alcohol or you have high amount of carbohydrates, then your metabolism is going on. And the moment that metabolism starts to switch, these are the moments that usually people awake. And that is usually very bothersome. Now, the answer I'm going to give to you is we don't have a general cookbook approach. The approach that I'd like to take, and hopefully, Dan, you will also agree with this, is a very personalized approach. That means for one person, an intervention could be much better than for another person. That's why diagnosis is so important, that we really find out what is the normal sleep cycle of a person, what are the reaction times, what's the baseline of a person. And we have been thinking over the last decades always in Gaussian curves, right? And these normal curves, they don't really help us a lot when it goes to enhancing the performance of an individual. So good diagnostics is important, taking into account some of the inherent factors that this person has, and then sketching out possibilities to enhance performance.
That's really, the personalized approach is absolutely crucial. We work a lot with top athletes as well, and they of course have to travel. So jet lag is a big issue. And there we have to really personalize. Of course, we all use melatonin, light exposure, timing of when they should have their meals. I mean, that's somewhat standardized. But then there are other factors that really have to be catered to the individual. But what is your experience with jet lag and combating jet lag?
Yeah, exactly the points you said. And when we fly away to places like Australia, that is the kind of number one most important thing to do, is to get the individual's sleep closer to the time that you're going to arrive at.
Yeah.
So then there's less of a shift, you can adapt quicker, because we know, again, the things we mentioned about how sleep is vital to health and performance, that is literally priority number one. So that's why we choose certain flights at certain times. That's why we leave a week earlier to go to places like Australia, because you are just not going to give yourself the best chance of performing or staying healthy if you try and squeeze that time at all.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to move on to stress, because there are various stresses. You have positive stress, you have negative stress that can be absolutely detrimental. And already in 1909, there was a first publication showing that you do need a bit of stress for performance. If you have no stress, you're not going to perform. On the other hand, if you have too much stress, you're also not going to perform. You're going to have a burnout, you're going to just crash. And so what do you do with athletes to capture the energy and kind of convert the stress into something positive, where they then go and win a World Cup, win a race?
Yeah, really good question. And again, similar to the kind of first answer, is that some of them are predisposed to that, and you can see that they are kind of born to be in those stressful situations. But a lot of the time it comes down to really understanding themselves at a high level, so understanding their core, how they react in stressful situations. As you mentioned, the kind of inverted U graph, that yes, we need stress to perform, and if you look at athletes, the best athletes, they need a semi-final or a final to perform at their best. If you look at tennis players, for instance, you're more likely to beat someone like Roger Federer in the first round than probably the final, because he has those stresses on him, and he's seeing that stress as a positive.
Sure.
And that's another thing, is like, what is the individual's mindset to stress? Because if you have a positive view of stress, you're more likely to be able to control cortisol levels, things like that affect the hormones that affect the body under stress. So we can work with the athletes to understand, do they know how they react in a stressful situation? Are they getting kind of too aggressive or too anxious and falling off the kind of peak of performance? Are they getting timid? Are they kind of shying away from it and they're not getting up for stress? And then you can, not getting up for that performance. And then you can start to do things, depending on where they sit on that graph, you can calm them down. You can use breathing techniques, or you can hype them up, use aggressive music, use caffeine, use exercise to try and boost them and get them closer to that peak.
It's good tips. Now I know how to beat Roger Federer. That's super.
Good luck.
I'll try. Well, when you're talking about music or really hype them up, caffeine, of course, as we know, caffeine used to be on the doping list until 1968 during the Olympics in Mexico City. Not anymore. But of course, caffeine can be crucial, also very individual. I remember you showing me some drivers that have this straw when they are doing the Formula One race, and they have it through the helmet somehow, and they can then sip on their drink with a bit of caffeine as well. But from a genetic point of view, do we all metabolize caffeine the same way, or do we have to consider also various genetic variations?
No, you really put it on the spot. Absolutely no. Everybody has a different way of metabolizing substances, and caffeine is actually one of the first substances that was analyzed from a pharmacogenetic point of view. And it's, for example, the enzyme that has that wonderful name of N-acetyltransferase, which is one of those enzymes involved in the degradation of caffeine, and that is not present to the same extent in everybody. So again, for one person, it works, the other person, it doesn't work. It's like when you ask people in the afternoon or in the evening, are you having another espresso? Somebody can have an espresso at 11 p.m. and go to bed and immediately sleep. Other people, they say the last coffee has to be at 3 p.m.
Or 12.
So, oh yeah, or 12, exactly. Or in Italy, a cappuccino after lunch is absolutely no-go.
Exactly.
So it's as many things, and everything that Dan said is, if I transpose it into the medical or biological arena, is all these substances, and you said as well, they are also expelled from the body to some extent, but with different speeds and extent, and that's very much genetically determined.
Yeah.
But the body itself, evolution biologically wise, does not like to have foreign substances, what we call xenobiotics, right? They want to be expelled. But not everybody expels the bad substances the same way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you have experience in that. I mean, how do you use caffeine with your athletes?
To be honest with that, it's sort of a bit of a trial and error, and some people respond, to small amounts well. Some people, they need a bit more. And like we referred to with that kind of inverted U, is that if they are kind of those predisposed to be those more kind of aggressive type A personalities, is giving them a lot of caffeine in that situation the best thing to do? But perhaps not. Perhaps they're going to actually it's going to increase their anxiety. As we know, high doses of caffeine can do that. So you have to be aware of what works for you well. Test it in training, test it when it doesn't matter as much.
Exactly, not during the competition.
Can I just clarify one thing? Just when we talk about caffeine, we don't necessarily mean coffee.
Right.
Because the good thing with coffee is, again, that coffee has caffeine, but has a mixtum compositum of a lot of other things like polyphenols. And as you know, some of the polyphenols take away some of the radicals that are also available in stress situations. And the body hates radicals and should get rid of radicals. So that's part of the benefits also that coffee can have.
Absolutely, and coffee, actually, there's plenty of evidence it's anti-fibrotic, so it's fairly good for the liver, if your stomach can take it, of course, and for the brain. So for clarity, for equity, actually also partially a protective role against dementia. So coffee is not as horrible as we think. However, it's very individual, and of course, if you have some problems with your stomach and reflux and heartburn and so forth, that's a different issue. But coffee can also, and caffeine can also absolutely be very, very beneficial. But when we talk about anxiety, I mean, in these times of the pandemic, a lot of countries, cities have really been in severe lockdowns. We see an increase in depression, we see an increase in anxiety. We see, unfortunately, also some consequences of it, like suicide, for instance. So some people, also our clients, some really need also antidepressants. So we can do all these things, but in the end, they might also need some pharmacological help. Are there individual differences there? What does a doctor, for instance, have to consider when prescribing these medications?
Anna, you're just highlighting exactly the center of what I've been doing for the last couple of years with increasing tendency, is to analyze the genetic makeup of patients to understand how do they metabolize medicines. And one of the most important groups of medicines that we nowadays have to look at are antidepressants, because the response to antidepressants is very much dependent on your genetic makeup, whether or not you get enough levels in your blood, because if you don't have the levels, you have no effect. But you can also have too high levels, which then only gives you adverse drug reactions or side effects that you don't want, like dry mouth and other problems. And so to orchestrate the best level of drug, it's useful to have a pharmacogenetic analysis of the person.
Yeah, that's a good point, because a lot of people also are non-responders, so you can even give those drugs and they absolutely don't react at all, which is of course a complete waste for everyone, and potentially a tragedy as well.
Especially in pain medicines.
Yep.
We do see in pain medicines as well that some people, they just do not have the receptors in a functioning format that they can profit from certain painkillers.
Yeah, and pain, of course, is a driver also of depression. I mean, that we know. It's if you walk around with pain for a longer period of time, it's really detrimental for your mental health and robustness. And that, of course, we've seen with athletes in rehabilitation where they've had an accident and they're really struggling with it. So pain is that's a really good point.
And picking up also what Dan said, you know, the individuality. In some forms of depression, you might want to have a treatment which is more activating, right?
Yeah.
Making people more active and socializing more. For others, they already feel updriven. You need some more sedating types of drugs. And that's exactly coming to the point. We have to understand the body first, understand what the mechanisms are, for example, the genetics, and then tailor treatment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tailor performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we just know it's so individual. Some people really thrive under stress, and you can really also learn to thrive under a certain amount of stress and also turn it into something really positive and capture it, which I will get back to that because I really want to get some perhaps individual or specific maybe examples that you might be able to share. But stress can also be extremely detrimental for health. It can have an impact, negative impact on the heart, on basic gastrointestinal tract, basically everything, not only the brain, but also the rest of our bodies. And we also see that in top events where the stress might be really high, when there is a certain predisposition, also maybe a genetic predisposition for heart disease. In high stress situations, we see, for instance, footballers, soccer players, that suddenly have a sudden cardiac arrest and just drop on the ground. What about that? I mean, for instance, Ericsson now at the UEFA Cup. I mean, there also we saw how incredibly detrimental stress can be in these situations. What's the genetic predisposition? What can we do there?
Excellent question. Again, you know, taking the analogy, it's that you have the situation of loading the gun and pulling the trigger.
Yes.
So most likely in this case, which is a classical case of cardiogenetics, there has been a high-risk predisposition. This high-risk predisposition was that there might have been, I don't really know what it is, but in most cases in these events, you have a genetic predisposition. So it's like ammunition loading the gun. And then there's a trigger, and the trigger could be a sports activity. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but then the trigger is pulled and you have a rhythm disturbance, and that rhythm disturbance can be managed for a certain point of time, but then it gets most likely unmanageable if you don't really take some severe measures to it. Yeah. So the take-home message is, yes, we have to understand what the genetic makeup is, because if we understand that, then we can take preventive measures.
Yeah, absolutely. We do also screenings on a yearly basis with Swiss Olympic of top athletes, and I work for Swiss Ice Hockey Federation, and it's really been shown to be extremely important to have these yearly checkups to just make sure that the athletes are fit and there are no genetic predispositions and so forth that really can be.
But Anna, just remind our listeners also that in the case of genetics, these things have to be only done once in your lifetime.
That's true.
So it's a very good baseline. Yeah. And again, the job of discussing with the clients or patients about these risk factors is to know what your baseline is. Yeah. So if you have that genetic risk, again, you can have a perfect life with it if you manage it well.
Exactly. And then we have the lifestyle risk factors, which we have to screen on a yearly basis, or even more often, depending on the person. But stress, as we said before, can also be extremely positive. You can really capture it and go and win the world championships. What can you tell us about that? Because this is really your field of expertise.
Yeah, I think these individuals, especially in maybe some of the more extreme sports, or the guys that thrive in those big occasions, they definitely kind of seek out those situations. They sometimes in their private life, in their sports that they do, that for them is part of their character, part of their purpose in terms of it really switches them on. They feel like they are living their best life when they're in those situations. So, yeah, in terms of it peaking your performance, I think for these athletes, a lot of them you feel are predisposed to be there in that situation, especially the very, very top. Again, that's not saying that training and doing all the holistic factors is downplaying that at all, because they also have to work on that to get that extra few percent. But yeah, these guys, they see that situation, they see getting on the start line in a Formula One race, that's when they're going to perform at the best. So again, they have that positive view. It's self-fulfilling, they build up that. Obviously, on the other hand, like if you get into that situation and you're constantly having kind of bad experiences and bad situations, then that's when it kind of becomes conflicting. And maybe their whole childhood they've gone through racing categories and performed in that situation. When they get into the top flight in Formula One, it becomes more difficult. So I think understanding, keeping a good level of perspective in that situation, understanding the reasons why, having a kind of good growth mindset to that situation, learning as much as you can, and also being kind of very balanced in how you reflect on yourself. Like it's very easy when you're competing against the best drivers in the world in a stressful situation to be hard on yourself and be negative on yourself. I think for all of us, it's sometimes kind of quite natural to do that. But you can remind yourself there's a lot that you've done well to get to where you are. There's a lot that you do well on a daily occurrence when they are going to those very kind of high stressful situations, and they've put themselves in the best possible situation to perform. So you have to try and change that mindset if it gets into a bit of a negative place.
And it's actually quite tricky, because in order to perform, you need to be hyped.
Yep.
On the other hand, you also need to keep calm.
Yeah.
That's very individual. I mean, I have had the chance to observe musicians in the classical field, but also in the non-classical field, and what they do before they go on stage. Some need a half an hour workout and really beat themselves up before coming on stage. And there are some that they really do nothing. They just come out of the blue, go on stage and perform fantastically. I mean, I'm talking, even with dancing and running and so on. And some need the other way around, right? They need like the yoga, they need to really come down. And it's like possibly concentrating energy in a way that is sustainable, and then going on stage and it sort of then starts exploding beautifully. But again, it's personal, and a good trainer will help the individual find out what is his best way of getting to that.
Exactly. I mean, we're, for instance, training or we're working with an Olympic biathlete. And of course, they need to perform, they need to ski, they need to really be fit. On the other hand, they need to be very calm when they're shooting. Yeah. So that I find fascinating. How do you combine those two?
I've actually used that analogy in Formula One as well, because they have to be very hyped up, ready to react very quickly, but they have to be very precise, especially kind of in qualifying, where every little fine movement makes a difference. And if in a stressful situation you are shaky, you are kind of overly aggressive and turning without precision, then that's when obviously you're not going to perform at your best. So it is definitely individual, and it's finding that individual balance. For me personally, in sporting environments, my personality type is a bit more laid back, a bit more relaxed. So when I've performed well, I've had to really get myself into a bit more of an aggressive position. Kind of pretend that it's life or death, that I catch the next person in a triathlon race. Whereas others, they're there straight away. So they do need to control that. They do need to calm that down. So it is about that high-level self-awareness, and it also changes with experience, changes with age. It definitely changes under stress, and being aware of what a colleague of mine uses this great kind of slide in presentations where they talk about stress tells. And like poker, if the person twitches when they're about to give away a good hand, like what are your stress tells? Like, are you aware of them? Are they kind of behavioural? Are they physical? Are they mental? Are they emotional? If you're really aware of those initial stress tells, like for example, if I'm aware now that my body temperature is increasing a little bit, or I'm aware that I'm starting to feel a little bit anxious in this situation, you can start to do something about it. You don't have to push on and exaggerate that situation and make it worse. You can actually go, right, okay, if I don't start to control my heart rate in this situation, I'm going to go into the first corner of a Formula One race too hyped up, too aggressive. So right now I'm feeling this way, let's calm it down. Otherwise that stress is going to accumulate. It's going to definitely produce poor performances. But ultimately for someone like me, I'll end up with a migraine or something like that down the line. And then I will have to lie down in a dark room and I will have to take action at some stage when that stress accumulates. So being aware of those first initial signs, having that high level of self-awareness, I think is really, really key in those situations.
Yeah. So there are individual differences, obviously, that's we've discussed today. But the core has to really also be in place. And I think that holds true for every single person or athlete. So to wrap it up, what would you concretely tell people? What are the most important steps to boost your resilience and keep sharp?
Like we said, you have to understand your position holistically. So really look at the sleep, the physical activity, all those sorts of things. And there's various wearables you can do that with. I'm wearing one now with the Oura Ring. And you can look at how your sleep is. You can analyse, do I really understand it? Am I really getting the quality of sleep? Am I really getting the quality of exercise I need to put my brain and my body in the best position to deal with stress and resilience? Then also coming back to kind of the individual's core. So we like to break that down in terms of their identity, their purpose, and their control. Understanding their identity, their characteristics, how they might change in stressful situations. But if you understand yourself really well, then you can start to take action. And in terms of purpose, like having a really clear purpose and goal will help you in those stressful situations. Reflect back to that, keep it in perspective that this is maybe part of a long-term plan, and that just because I have one bad session in a Formula One race, it's not going to make a difference to my overall career. And then again, in terms of control, analysing, are you in control of your life? Are you taking action, taking decisions in line with your identity in terms of if you need rest, are you taking that rest? Are you performing at the times when you can perform at your greatest? And getting those in balance, and it's very, very personal as well. So it takes a bit of time to work through those things, work through those activities. When you can build up that sense of understanding of who you are, then I think it gives you a much stronger basis and foundation to deal with stressful situations. You're less likely to have self-doubts because you know who you are and you're happy with that. And you're more likely to be able to have high levels of self-belief and self-confidence. And that, for me, is absolutely vital in sporting arenas and in life, because with high levels of self-belief and self-confidence, you can start to try and take risks. And you have that belief that you can take risks. And if you can take risks, then you can produce great performances as well. Along with a good support network, then you're onto a winner.
So thank you, Dan. Thank you, Thomas, for this really inspiring discussion. Thank you also to our audience. Thank you for following our series. And of course to our sponsors who have made it possible to do this series. Greetings and goodbye for now from the studio at Julius Baer in Zurich. Thanks a lot.